In his band, he has the weakest rhythm section ever known in a multi-platinum band. The drummer can't drum, the bass player can't play, the guitar player has one riff.
Right.
This
Swaggering.
just crooning, and the new album, That Which You Leave Behind, is the most tired, adult-oriented crap I've ever heard since the last Sting record.
Henry Rollins has never been the type to bite his tongue, and at 64, he's sharper than ever. The former Black Flag frontman has built his career on raw honesty, brutal truths, and a refusal to sugarcoat his opinions. While he's praised countless artists over the years, there are some bands he absolutely couldn't stand. Here are the 5 bands Henry Rollins openly hated the most. U2 Henry Rollins, the notoriously outspoken punk icon, has never been one to mince words when it comes to his opinions on music. Among the many bands he's critiqued over the years, one group that consistently drew his ire is U2, a band often hailed as one of the most influential and successful acts of the 1980s. For Rollins, however, U2 represented everything that could go wrong in mainstream rock: overhyped, overproduced, and ultimately underwhelming when measured purely as musicianship. Despite the global acclaim, the sold-out stadiums, and the endless accolades, Rollins was adamant in his dismissal of the band, positioning them as one of the most overrated acts in rock history. Rollins's criticism was particularly pointed toward Bono, the charismatic frontman whose voice and stage presence have become synonymous with the band's identity. Rollins viewed Bono's public persona as more grandiose than substantive, describing his performances and public appearances as a form of self-aggrandizement rather than genuine artistry. Where many celebrated Bono for blending music with activism, Rollins remained deeply skeptical. He argued that Bono's commitment to social and political causes often felt performative, designed more for publicity and image management than for effecting real change. To Rollins, Bono's speeches, benefit concerts, and media appearances were less a reflection of sincerity and more a carefully constructed personal brand that elevated U2 above the music itself. Beyond Bono, Rollins had little patience for the rest of the band, especially the rhythm section, which he repeatedly described as the worst rhythm section in big rock. For him, the drums and bass lacked the precision, energy, and drive that he expected from a band that was performing on such a monumental scale. While U2 fans often credit the subtle atmospheric textures of Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. as the backbone of the band's sound, Rollins felt that without the intervention of outside producers, the music would not have reached the level of critical acclaim it did. In particular, he pointed to the influence of Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois, the celebrated production duo responsible for many of U2's most iconic albums. Rollins argued that much of U2's perceived genius was not inherent to the band itself, but rather the result of Eno and Lanois shaping and polishing a sound that, in his view, was otherwise lacking in depth and originality. In interviews, Rollins often contrasted U2's style with the raw, unfiltered energy he valued in punk and hardcore music. While U2 leaned heavily on atmospheric layering, stadium-ready choruses, and polished production, Rollins championed music that felt visceral, immediate, and unadulterated. He dismissed U2's bombastic anthems as formulaic, claiming that the band's music relied too heavily on emotional manipulation and sweeping gestures to evoke a reaction from audiences. To him, the soaring guitars, echoing drums, and Bono's soaring vocals created a kind of spectacle, but one that was ultimately hollow when stripped of its production gloss. Rollins' critiques were not merely contrarian. They reflected a deeply held philosophy about what rock music should be. In his view, bands should earn their acclaim through the raw power of their instruments, the authenticity of their message, and the integrity of their performance, not through media savvy, image cultivation, or the intervention of high-profile producers. In this framework, U2 failed on nearly every count. While the world saw a band of immense talent and cultural significance, Rollins saw a carefully packaged product, elevated by circumstance and production rather than true musical prowess. Rave music, the band of DJs. Rollins often spoke of the rave scene as though it were a single monolithic entity, a collective band of DJs unified not by creativity or musical integrity, but by spectacle, repetition, and the ability to generate energy through the simplest of means. For Rollins, whose musical philosophy had been forged in the intensity and authenticity of punk, hardcore, and rock, the rise of rave culture represented a direct challenge to everything he valued about music. Rollins' contempt for rave music stemmed largely from its perceived lack of substance. In his world, music was not merely entertainment. It was an expression of emotion, intellect, and effort. He came from a background where lyrics mattered, where the interplay of instruments carried weight, and where every note had to earn its place. Rave music, with its relentless loops, synthesizers, and programmed beats, represented the opposite, a style where complexity and lyrical depth were optional, if not irrelevant. To Rollins, the simplicity of repetitive beats and synthetic sounds felt like an affront to the artistry that had defined rock, punk, and hardcore. Whereas a rock song might convey anger, hope, or despair through both words and instrumentation, rave music, he argued, often existed purely to manipulate energy and emotion on the dance floor, offering instant gratification rather than lasting artistic impact. Perhaps most damningly, Rollins targeted the DJs who dominated the rave scene, casting them as antithetical to the musician's craft. In interviews, he famously said, "You're not a musician, you're a thief of music with a record player." This biting remark encapsulated his view that DJs did not create music in the traditional sense. They merely repurposed what others had made. The effort, struggle, and mastery he associated with playing instruments, composing lyrics, and arranging songs were, in his eyes, replaced by a form of performance that required minimal technical skill. To Rollins, the act of blending records or programming beats was not comparable to the creation of something original, meaningful, or challenging. It was, rather, a shortcut to fame and audience reaction. Rollins' disdain also extended to the cultural significance of rave music. By the late 1980s and 1990s, rave culture had exploded into a global phenomenon, dominating clubs, festivals, and youth culture. Its appeal was immediate, visceral, and communal, a pulsating celebration of rhythm and electronic sound. Yet Rollins could not reconcile its popularity with what he considered the true purpose of music. The ease with which rave DJs could produce sound, combined with the ecstatic adulation of massive crowds, only deepened his sense of frustration. In his view, the public's embrace of a genre that required little effort or understanding reflected a troubling shift in the music world: the elevation of spectacle over substance, showmanship over craft. Underlying all of Rollins' criticism was a philosophical clash. Where rave music prioritized rhythm, repetition, and collective energy, Rollins prized individual expression, risk, and authenticity. Rock music, punk music, and hardcore demanded sweat, pain, and emotional investment, not just pressing play and watching the crowd react. To Rollins, a band earned its respect through struggle, through nights spent perfecting riffs, developing lyrics, and pushing musical boundaries. Rave DJs, by contrast, were in his eyes shortcuts to excitement, creators of sound without consequence, performers who could generate thrills without ever touching the soul of music itself. Despite the widespread popularity of rave music, Rollins never softened his stance. He approached it with the same uncompromising intensity he applied to critiquing mainstream rock or celebrity culture. To him, rave culture was emblematic of a broader decline in musical integrity, a movement where appearance, convenience, and hype replaced the grit, intelligence, and passion that had always defined the best music. In his mind, no matter how large the audience, no matter how immersive the lights and beats, rave music lacked the weight and effort that separated true art from mere entertainment. For Henry Rollins, this was not just a matter of taste. It was a question of principle and a battle cry for the preservation of authenticity in a world increasingly enamored with the effortless and the ephemeral. John Lydon, Sex Pistols, public image looted. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Lydon's image as a fearless provocateur, a singer who spat in the face of convention, and a lyricist who captured the raw chaos of punk resonated deeply with Rollins. Lydon's defiance of authority, his scathing wit, and his refusal to compromise on artistic integrity embodied everything Rollins admired. He wasn't just a musician, he was a symbol of rebellion, a living manifesto of the punk ethos that Rollins himself had devoted his life to upholding. However, admiration can be a fragile thing, and Rollins' idealized image of Lydon came crashing down during a single encounter that left him stunned and disillusioned. The meeting occurred at a press event for a punk documentary, an occasion that should have been a celebration of the music and culture they both revered. Instead, Lydon arrived in a state of extreme intoxication, behaving in a manner that Rollins found not just disappointing, but almost grotesque. The once heroic figure, in Rollins's eyes, reduced the event to farce, turning what was supposed to be a respectful professional gathering into a spectacle of sloppiness and carelessness. Witnessing Lydon's conduct firsthand, Rollins was forced to confront the dissonance between the myth of the punk icon he had idolized and the reality of the man before him. Rollins' reaction was both immediate and scathingly candid. He expressed his disappointment vividly, recalling Lydon as a hero to me, and he was such a drunk, pathetic slob. How sad. Let's not end up like him. In that moment, the myth shattered. The qualities that Rollins had revered, the fierce independence, the raw intelligence, the fearless anti-establishment stance, seemed compromised, tainted by Lydon's inability to conduct himself with even a minimal degree of responsibility. The encounter highlighted a harsh truth for Rollins. Heroism in art does not always translate into personal integrity, and admiration for public figures is often complicated by the realities of their private lives. For Rollins, this experience was transformative. Lydon, once a symbol of everything Rollins aspired to embody, was irrevocably humanized in the worst possible way. The lesson was stark. Admiration must be tempered with reality, and even the icons who seem untouchable can disappoint when stripped of their mythos. Rollins' disillusionment was not merely a personal slight. It carried broader implications for how he viewed the punk movement itself. The ethos of rebellion, raw energy, and uncompromising authenticity that punk championed suddenly seemed more fragile, more susceptible to the failings of the very people who defined it. This incident cemented Lydon's place on Rollins' list of musicians he no longer respected. To Rollins, true artistry was inseparable from responsibility, self-discipline, and a commitment to integrity both on and off stage. Lydon's failure to live up to the standard he had inspired left Rollins with a cautionary tale about hero worship, one that underscored the fragility of ideals when confronted with human weakness. Rollins's anger and sadness were intertwined, a blend of mourning the collapse of a personal hero and reaffirming his own values. Where once he had seen Lydon as a model for fearless creativity, he now saw him as a warning. The gap between legend and reality can be vast, and the disillusionment it brings is often as painful as it is instructive. Morrissey, The Smiths. Henry Rollins, the ever-vocal guardian of authenticity in music, has never hesitated to call out artists he perceives as hypocritical, self-indulgent, or otherwise undeserving of admiration. Among his targets, Morrissey, the enigmatic former frontman of the Smiths, has received particularly blistering criticism. To Rollins, Morrissey is not simply a flawed artist. He represents a personality and public persona so egregiously self-centered and disingenuous that Rollins has described him in some of the harshest terms he reserves for public figures. Rollins once famously stated, "Morrissey embodies every horrible human trait that a human could possibly possess. I mean, he's British, he doesn't have to work very hard, they have a handicap anyway." This unflinching remark encapsulates both the intensity and specificity of Rollins's disdain. highlighting a broader philosophy about what it means to be a musician and a public figure worthy of respect. Rollins's contempt for Morrissey stems in large part from what he perceives as inauthenticity. In Rollins' view, music is not merely entertainment or a career. It is a vessel for honesty, effort, and connection. Every note, lyric, and performance should reflect something genuine, something wrested from life through toil and creative struggle. Morrissey, with his carefully curated melancholic persona, his cultivated witticisms, and his public pronouncements that often teetered between cryptic and controversial, struck Rollins as emblematic of the opposite, a performer whose image and affectation outweighed any real labor or integrity behind the music. The frontman's theatrics and penchant for provocation, which endeared him to millions of fans, were, to Rollins, signs of a performer more interested in spectacle than substance. Rollins's characterization of Morrissey also touches on a perceived sense of entitlement. By referring to him as British and implying that he doesn't have to work very hard, Rollins critiques what he sees as an attitude of complacency. Whereas Rollins himself built his career on relentless touring, recording, and self-discipline, he observed in Morrissey a reliance on his innate cultural position and fan base, a comfort that allowed him to project grandiose opinions without demonstrating the effort or sacrifice Rollins associates with real artistry. To Rollins, this was not merely a minor flaw, it was emblematic of the very traits he despises: laziness masked as genius, arrogance without accountability, and charm without substance. Moreover, Rollins' criticism goes beyond work ethic to encompass moral and social character. By saying that Morrissey embodies every horrible human trait, Rollins signals a profound disapproval of the former Smiths singer's behavior and public statements over the years. From Rollins's perspective, the combination of self-absorption, public provocation, and a cultivated aura of superiority reflects a personality fundamentally at odds with the principles of honesty and integrity he demands from musicians. This is not a critique of Morrissey's voice or songwriting alone. It is a denunciation of the entire persona he projected to the world, which Rollins viewed as corrosive to the values he associates with true artistry. Trent Reznor. Henry Rollins has always maintained a simple, unwavering philosophy about rock and roll. It should be raw, honest, and unflinchingly personal. For him, the best music emerges from artists who wear their hearts on their sleeves, channeling the darkest corners of their psyche into every chord, lyric, and scream. Whether it's the growl of a guitar, the pounding of drums, or a singer's vulnerable confession, Rollins believes that the very act of creation should radiate intensity and authenticity. In this context, Trent Reznor, the driving force behind 9 Inch Nails, fits neatly into that category. Reznor's music, haunting, visceral, and often brutally self-reflective, seemed, on paper, like the kind of emotionally charged, uncompromising work Rollins admired. Both artists shared a penchant for exploring personal darkness, a willingness to confront discomfort, and a refusal to compromise on artistic vision. Yet despite this apparent alignment, their personal and professional interaction was far more complicated than admiration alone could account for. The tension began during a touring stint together on Lollapalooza, when Rollins' band, led by Rollins after his departure from Black Flag, was scheduled to open for 9 Inch Nails. Rollins, by then a seasoned veteran of the punk and hardcore scenes, expected to occupy a position of respect in the festival lineup. What he found instead was a band whose credibility he questioned, and a situation that challenged his sense of hierarchy within the rock world. Though he recognized Reznor's intensity and talent, Rollins felt that his own contributions to rock, shaped by years of sweat, struggle, and hardcore authenticity, should not have been in the opening slot for a band he perceived as younger, less tested, and less steeped in the rigorous ethos that defined Rollins' band's approach. This mismatch, combined with the high-profile nature of Lollapalooza, created a fraught dynamic tinged with both ego and principle. Reznor, for his part, has admitted that the relationship between the two artists was never entirely smooth. In interviews, he reflected on the tension with candor and a surprising degree of introspection, acknowledging that Rollins was irritated by Nine Inch Nails' buzz, while he himself had reservations about Rollins's approach. Speaking to Spin, Reznor described the situation in measured terms. "We irritated him because there was a buzz about Nine Inch Nails, and we were the guys with no credibility. We were the young guys on Lollapalooza. I think a lot of what he does is pretty good, but he irritated me on a personal level." This statement reveals a delicate balancing act. Reznor respected Rollins' artistry and intensity, but was also aware of the friction caused by contrasting personalities, egos, and differing conceptions of credibility within the music industry. The encounter between Rollins' band and Nine Inch Nails illustrates a larger truth about Rollins's worldview. Credibility and authenticity matter above all else, even when confronted with immense talent or widespread acclaim. Rollins measures musicians not solely by their technical skill or popularity, but by their ability to convey the weight of lived experience, to pour effort and honesty into every note. To him, Nine Inch Nails, despite its compelling music and emotional depth, did not yet carry the same cultural and artistic authority as he believed he and his peers had earned through years of struggle and uncompromising work in punk. This insistence on earned respect, while perhaps alienating to some, is consistent with Rollins' lifelong insistence on integrity and personal accountability in music. Despite the mutual irritation, both artists recognized the merit in the other's work, even if personal dynamics complicated their professional interactions. Reznor admitted that much of Rollins' output was pretty good, while Rollins acknowledged Reznor's raw emotional energy. Yet the tour left a lasting mark on their relationship, one tinged with cautious respect, unspoken rivalry, and the lingering tension that arises when two uncompromising figures collide. It serves as a vivid snapshot of Rollins' ethos. Talent and innovation alone are not enough. Credibility, effort, and an unyielding commitment to authenticity are what ultimately define who deserves a place at the top of rock and roll. What do you think about the bands and artists that Henry Rollins hates? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.